this computer. All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Evan. I get to serve as the KidPoint pastor at LifePoint Church, and I'm excited to have a conversation about how to walk kids through tricky times and how to have tough conversations with kids. And so I'm not an expert. I'm a pastor, but I'm not a counselor. And so I'm a parent and a pastor. And so I wanted to bring some voices that are smarter than me, some voices who are farther along than me in some areas, and just gather some voices on how, as LifePoint parents and as parents in general, for anybody who's watching this, how we can have tough conversations with our kids in the middle of all that's going on in our world right now. And so on the very front end, I want to say, with everything that's going on right now, we're in the middle of a season of COVID-19. We came out of quarantine. Kids' schools closed early, and so all those are stress points for them. And then we've got the racial tensions that are going on in multiple cities in our country, from peaked by George Floyd's death up in Minneapolis, and now all that's going on. And so we know there's a lot going on. And especially the racial conversation is starting to take off in a lot of areas, and people are really engaging with it. And we're not going to shy away from it in this conversation, but we're also not going to dive deep into it, because that deserves its own conversation. And we're actually working on that. We're going to try and, no promises, but we're going to try and put together a video panel of people who can speak into that, and how we can help our kids through that, and how as parents we can walk through it. But that's not going to be the focus of this conversation. This conversation is going to focus on a framework for how to help kids walk through tough conversations, and also some just real practical stuff on how we can walk kids through hard conversations in lots of different areas in their lives. And so I brought some of my, some people that I know really well, and some people that I'm getting to know and that I'm like, ooh, I would love to know better. Let's start with Kim Coggins. Will you just introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us what you do, your background in counseling, and kind of who you are.
Hi, I'm Kim Coggins. I'm a professor at Austin Peay State University in our counseling program. So my background is in counseling, and my focus is work with children and adolescents, and specifically play therapy. I also love to work with parents and caregivers and give away my skills and empower parents to be the ones who are pouring into their children's lives. Personally, I'm a brand new mom. I've got an almost 8-month-old, and so I'm enjoying learning even more about the parenting life from him.
That's awesome. And you also have, just to give the background, you have a master's in children and family therapy,
and marriage and family therapy, and a PhD in counselor education.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I'm really excited to have your voice in this conversation, to come from that perspective. Now, Militia is one of our care pastors here. So just introduce yourself a little bit to those who don't know you very well.
Okay, so I am a care pastor here at LifePoint. That's kind of a new area for me in the last, I'd say, 2-3 years. In the background, we have 4 kids that are now grown. Now we have 4 grandchildren, which are the most amazing little people ever. And then when I was raising kids, I worked for a program called Parents as Teachers. And so I would do home visits with families, and I would actually go into their home and educate the parent on development and age-appropriate behaviors and what's coming next and what to look for. And so I have that background with families, and I worked for a health department for several years as a health educator. And again, in that job, I worked a lot with young families. So I feel pretty saturated. I'm still learning. You're never done learning. I don't have all the answers, but I guess I've learned a lot along the way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And actually, like, as I'm just hearing each of you, I'm like, ooh, I'm getting more excited for this conversation. It's great. Dre, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do at LifePoint, and your background with speaking as a dad.
My name is Dre Merriweather, and I get to serve here on our small groups team. And this is my second year here at LifePoint in this position. So starting to learn a lot more about small groups and gathering in small groups, and just cultivating that environment for our community and our church. I'm a dad of 4, and our ages range from the age of 9 is our oldest. Her name is Aniston. And then we have another little girl. Her name is Adley. And then she has a twin sister, identical twin sister. Her name's Avery. And then we have a little boy. His name is Adrian. So yes, they're all A's. I had no choice.
A-team.
The A-team. Their mom, I think I had a little say-so in the middle name. As a dad, I've learned to say yes, dear, and just roll with the punches. But yeah, it's been great. They've taught me a lot. I'm learning a whole bunch with them daily, and especially right now in this time too. It's been really fun with everything that's going on with COVID and being at home, and there is no school. I know the twins have been kind of excited. They like to play.
Yeah.
So, but our 4-year-old Adrian, he's pretty active too. But yeah, it's just fun. I'm learning how to have fun with them. They're at a fun age too, where the stories are big, and I'm still a superhero, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. And for me, I get to serve as our KidPoint pastor. I have a background, my bachelor's degree is in children and family ministries. And so I've been a kids pastor for, what am I working on now? 8 years? About 8 years in ministry. And I'm a dad of 3, soon to be 4. My wife is pregnant with our 4th. And so I'm excited. We're getting ready. We're doing lots of nesting right now. Lots of getting ready for that 4th. So, all right, let's jump right into this conversation. We want to provide a framework for parents on some of the ways that they can, we'll get to practical stuff kind of as we go, but we want to start with a framework for parents on how they can have those tough conversations with their kids. And so these conversations I know can range they can range from anything. Kim, can you just speak to some of the stressors that kids face that are big in a kid's world, that sometimes to a parent, we don't see how big it is in a kid's world?
Yeah, just in hearing from children and hearing from parents, a lot of kids, you think about kids not having to go to school being a really cool thing for them, but for a lot of kids, they're really grieving the time that they had with friends, the time that they had with their teachers. I know my niece graduated pre-K, and so she missed her that seems like a small thing. It's like you've got 100 more years of school, but for her, that was a big milestone. And so just that loss is a big deal for kids. Kids also just hearing about the scary things going on and not always hearing the whole story or having a full understanding can be problematic for them. Kids see what parents are experiencing, so they're picking up on parents' their own stress and their own worry. And then different kids are having to face different things. Some of them are grieving physical loss of family members, not being able to see grandparents or other important people in their lives. And even the losses that their families are facing, the financial instability, losses of jobs, their world has shifted. What it looks like is different, and kids tend to be creatures of habit, and a lot of their routines have changed, and that can really throw off things for children and how they're engaging with their families and with each other.
Yeah. And I know a lot of that, as parents and as adults, our world has just kept shifting and shifting and shifting and shifting and shifting. And to some extent, like I know for me, I'm feeling a little bit like, all right, COVID it's not over, but the big press of it, the pressing on my mind of it has shifted a little bit with the events of recent weeks, with the racial tensions all across our country. But for kids, especially if their parents are not telling them as much about that stuff, their world is still being pressed on for those different things. And so, Militia, can you just speak to some of the, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Some of the things that you might see because you said like age appropriate development was some of the things that you got to look for in the jobs you were doing. What are some of the ways that you see kids expressing those emotions and expressing, and Kim, you could speak into this too, and even Jure, like as you've seen this in your own kids, what do you see kids expressing their emotions in ways that parents might not understand, that they're just expressing like something that's inside of them that they don't have another way to express?
I think, so I don't know if everyone knows about the Enneagram, but I'm a 5 on the Enneagram. So I'm an observer. And I think, so that resonates really well with me. I think that as parents, we can become just really great observers of our kids. And so each kid is just as different, as soon as you think you have them figured out, they go through another phase of life. So I think we just need to be super good observers of them and their behaviors. And so if something's off, just giving them some space of trying to figure out why they're off. So play with them a little bit, read a story with them, like find a quiet space, make time to kind of connect with them, slow down your day if you can, so that you can kind of see what's going on here. Is this an age, a developmental thing? Are they getting sick? Are they feeling the tensions of the world? So I found that the most important thing we can do is just make sure that we're super intentional of creating space for our kids to talk. We get so busy, we can go to the TV so easy, or just think, oh, they're watching a movie, they're good. But dinner times are a great time to just make a habit in your household, to sit down and eat together, because you'll see each other face to face. So many of us don't do that anymore if we don't sit at a table. So story time with parents, quiet time, just turning everything off and being involved in their play. And then when you start to, see those behaviors, we can tune in a little bit better, but follow their cues. I think too often we think we know what's going on, and we may jump to a wrong conclusion. So just following their cues, like asking them some questions, just like we would an adult. Hey, what's happening today? Does your tummy hurt, or just something hurt, or, just keep asking questions so that they can tell you what's going on, instead of us jumping that to a conclusion that, opens up a whole area that maybe didn't need to be opened up. Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
So kind of be just consistently observing your kids and learning to become a student really of your kids.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, Jure, you and I were talking yesterday as we were setting things up for this. And I know some parents, when they're processing through this stuff, parents, just like for me, I know I as a parent have over this course of this time been figuring out, how do I process through it? How do I take a minute and, how do I get my own emotions under control, let alone try to pass this along to my kids? And so you said something really great yesterday, because I know, I don't know, I mean, Kim, you haven't had this experience yet, but I'm guessing you other two have, where Becca and I have been talking, and Caleb's like downstairs playing with Legos in his bedroom, and we're talking about something, and we're just talking in normal voices, and suddenly Caleb answers, like we're saying something, and Caleb just yells up from his bedroom, "I want to do this," or whatever it is, as part of the conversation. So those moments when I thought he was totally checked out, not hearing anything, he's tuned in and listening to everything I'm saying. And then there's those moments where I'm like, "Come on, man, I'm staring right in front of you, and you're not listening to me." Dre, can you speak to that just a little bit? As a dad, how have you and then your wife, Jessica, how have you guys been processed through this and then helped your kids in the middle of this season?
A lot of those conversations have been closed door conversations. And basically what will happen in our household is there's a certain time at night after we get kids to bed, or we'll really go in for that conversation, or really go after that conversation. And if there's something that the conversation needs to be had right in the moment, it's like, "Hey, give me and mom a minute and let us talk."
Sure.
And even in that, our oldest, our 9-year-old, she's our big listener right now. So there's always a wandering ear that's close by, that's trying to pick up on the information. So still some of the conversations that we have can be coded. There's certain things we know what to say when they're in the room and what not to say when they're in the room. And just for Aniston's aspect, our 9-year-old, we will involve her in some of that conversation.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, me and mom are talking, and then we will address her specifically and say, hey, Aniston, this is what we're talking about. This is where we're from, and this is what we're going to do. And just kind of giving her just the directives of what's going on in the room or what's going on. Especially right now with school, that was kind of our big hush hush for a moment. You know, we would have those conversations behind closed doors, and then when we would hear something from the school or from principals or teachers, it was like, okay, well, listen, this is what's going on. How do you feel about it?
Sure.
Well, let me assure you, everything's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. We're going to get through this together. So it's one of those, like, yeah, although I'm finding out about this information, you know, it's kind of like as they are, but I'm able to walk with them through this and just kind of be a guide and a protector as well. So
that's great. That's great. And how you have 4 kids, but most of the time only one of them you're involving in that conversation.
Yeah.
Kim, can you speak to that from a counselor's perspective and how, like, just walking kids through those tough conversations? I know one of your passions is play therapy, and getting down and being in there and playing with your kids. Can you speak to that for just, again, a framework piece of how, like, just to frame it for parents of how that can be, how that can be a key for their kids, like the key to unlock that conversation with their kids?
So when we think about children and where they are developmentally, their brains typically, especially for kids under 6 or 7, they aren't able to really grasp abstract concepts yet. And so much of what's going on and so much that's a part of these hard conversations is abstract. Even a virus is pretty abstract. Racial tensions is really abstract. And even things like happy and sad and worried are really abstract. And those are all the things that our children are experiencing and feeling. And so in order to help them understand and for them to be able to process, it's important to have something to help bridge the abstract to the concrete. Yeah. And play does that. Play gives them a concrete way to express what's going on, to play out themes that they're experiencing. And honestly, for kids, play is their first language. They knew how to play before they knew how to talk. And so all these things that they may not have words for, they know how to play. And so being able to give children the space to play through things that you a lot of times see their experiences coming out, what they're feeling about those experiences. It's always interesting for me as a counselor to be able to have stories of, here's what I've seen in my own kids. Or like, I know my niece who is 5, that she's been really feeling the separation from her peers. And she may not be able to come out and say, I really miss playing with other kids, but we see her in her play pulling out her dolls and I'm going to do this with my doll and we're going to go take this. And you see her just striving for that connection with her toys that she can't always communicate. That when you, like Melissa was talking about, slowing things down, turning off the electronics and playing with kids gives you a chance to hear what they're communicating, whether they're able to use their words or they're using their play to get out what they're experiencing, what they're feeling.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Man, that is so good.
Mm-hmm.
That is, sorry, you could probably see my wheels spinning. Just like I'm even thinking about it for my own kids, just thinking through how they play and how that can communicate what they're feeling. There's a great book. I loved how you said even things like happy, sad, that the emotions that they're feeling, kids are so concrete that they feel those emotions all over in their body. And we as adults do too, but we've learned to label what it is. There's a great book that my kids love reading through. It's called, what is it? It's What Am I Feeling by Dr. Josh and Christy Straub. And it actually has like a chart in the back of nine emotions and just a face. And they can now identify, like, this is happy. This is courage, courage, sad, angry, these different things, and some of the ways that you can, that we can help kids label those emotions. So let's get into just a couple of practical things on what parents can do to have these tough conversations. Because I think that's a good framework of be a student of your, really be a student and observer of your kids, include your kids in age appropriate ways. And maybe we can hit some of those age appropriate ways, just kind of some mile markers for kids as we go through this practical stuff. But also just that play is a great way, getting down, slowing down and playing is a great way to have those conversations with your kids. I've found that if I'm sitting down face to face with my kids, I don't have as good a conversation as when I'm playing with them. So can we get into just some practical stuff? Maybe we'll start with Militia and then go to Jure and Kim. Just some real what would be a tip that you can give to a parent on how they can have some real practical things on how they can have maybe starting, seeing when those opportunities come up, or how they can have those tough conversations with their kids. So Militia, let's just go ahead and start with you.
So one of the things to keep in mind is just each child and their personality. And so I think, I'm trying to think this through. I have so many things firing, but one of the practical things is always kind of knowing your child, where they are age appropriate and when you're going to have those conversations. And we always want to be able to open up doors for conversations. But we want to be cautious not to open them too soon. A couple of our kids were super verbal, so they knew a lot of words that I don't even know how they learned. And so then it's easy to think, oh, they understand the meaning behind that word, but they really didn't. Oh. So they weren't quite there yet. So just because they might have a great vocabulary doesn't necessarily mean that they're emotionally ready for some tough conversations. So really keep it simple and follow their lead. And then with some of these conversations that we're having about COVID and sickness and race and diversity, I think, us as a believer, right, Jesus teaches us that the most important thing to do is to love and respect people. And so that kind of all comes into that. Isn't it great that God gave us all kinds of people, men and women and different colors and different color eyes and different color hair, and model that and teach it, that we delight in that. So having those conversations is kind of an everyday natural thing. So even just, most of our family has blue eyes, right? So I remember when one of our kids was really little, and my sister-in-law came, who has brown eyes, and he got up on her lap and he looked in her eyes really deep, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, Juju, you have chocolate eyes," and we all thought that was so cute. But then we had to talk about, oh, we all do have different whose eyes colors, but I think we can approach it just that simply. Maybe that person doesn't have hair and that one does, and that one has gray. And so just
so it's not too, so you're saying it's really not too, as soon as they start asking about that, and because I think kids naturally, so there's a certain aspect where they don't realize, they don't recognize as many differences, but then there's some things where they're recognizing differences that we wouldn't even, we consciously have, that's just part of our world, but to them it's brand new.
Yeah. And so just using those teachable moments. Isn't that cool? And just keeping it fun and light and just talking through that. And then just always coming back to, just, we want to respect everybody. And, we teach kids, if you say nice things to other people, you don't, so it's just a teachable thing that we do on a daily basis. But you always have those, those moments as a parent where you're just on pins and needles and you're not sure, what they're going to say. So being close by and being able to help them with some conversations when it's appropriate, walk that through with them. And
because I know you said, as we were talking yesterday, getting ready for this, you said one of the things that your kids went through, like a shift in their world, was 9/11, and you had a middle schooler down to a kindergartner.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
so what did you do, kind of like, because I'm thinking, I've been an elementary pastor most of my my kids ministry career, and now I'm over everybody. So I love talking about the little kids, talking about preschoolers, but my mind a lot of times goes right to elementary kids. So can you just speak to, because you've had those elementary kids and now had them grow older, and during that elementary age, and maybe even to that early middle school, that preteen or tweens, what were the conversations like there?
So I'm trying to remember the actual conversations. I do know, like, for one thing that was kind of an advantage for us back then is we lived in the middle of the country in Iowa, and we had no internet. Like, we didn't have TV, like we had the basic stations. And so we didn't have that stressor that could be a stressor that a lot of families have nowadays, So I think that was actually a blessing, because we didn't have things running all the time, like the news and stuff. We had to be intentional about that and just being careful with what the kids saw. But we really tried to continue on with life as it was for them. I keep going back to dinner table conversations. Like, sitting at the table for dinner was just key in our household. And they didn't always go great, but a lot of times they did. That was the time where we sat face to face around the table, and that those conversations could be had. And so it was kind of a natural part of the day at supper. Hey, we're going to sit down, we're going to eat, process the day together. So that way it happens, right? You got to eat every day. And so kids learn so much, and you learn about your kids. And so that's a great place to do that. But you do want to be careful if we're like, we feel stress. I think all of us feel stress right now and anxiety. So being in tune with what we're feeling and making sure that we have a safe person to talk to, whether that or a counselor, that we go and take care of what we're feeling, so that we're not processing that,
with our kids.
Yeah, so we want to be healthy enough so that we can process with our kids. So we have to do good self-care.
Yeah.
And I guess is what I'm saying. And so back then, Randy and I had to have a lot of private conversations, because we needed to talk about what was happening in our country. So back to Jure, that's where you have those private conversations. You have to wait. It takes self-discipline for us as an adult, to wait until you can. You can't just blurt it out, because they're listening. And if you're on the phone, even with a friend, your kids are listening. So I think we just have to be super mindful of what they're hearing. And then, save those conversations when you can be super intentional with those people to process life with. And assure them, God's our assurance. He's our assurance. Like, that's where our faith comes from. And so when we teach that to our kids, hey, things seem really crazy right now, but our faith comes from the Lord, and He sees us. He knows what's going on. He cares for us. And so just those simple conversations with our kids to remind them, and to pray, pray with them. There's just so much that happens in prayer.
I would say there's so many practical things that you can build into the rhythms of your life that can make a difference. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be everything. It can be, you start with one thing. You start with one little thing. Jure, can you just speak to as it practically? I know your kids, and I've seen, I have the privilege of pastoring your kids, and I see faith that it's not just at church, that I get to see a faith that I know is translating throughout their entire life. And so I know that starts at home. Can you just speak to some of that, the practical side of what you're doing as a parent, but also the practical side of how to set up our kids with a kingdom mindset, this kingdoms are, we're part of a kingdom that's not America, not a kingdom that's this world. We're part of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. Wow. No pressure.
No pressure. Just threw that, just a softball to you right there.
Well, it does. It makes you as a parent be super intentional. A lot of the best messages I've ever had preached to me have come from my kids. As a dad, there's a lot of times of the way that I was raised, or the way that, I pictured that I was raised. It was like there's my father, and then there was me, and I really couldn't see the God factor in that. And not that my dad and my parents didn't really give me a faith-based, upbringing or anything like that. It was just like, oh, this is my dad. Let me do what he says. And I feel like for me and my children, I feel like God just speaks to me through them. There's been moments of where I've gone in for discipline, and I'm like, all right, I got to get on to him. Like, you can't. And then I'm looking at myself as I'm going into discipline, and I'm like, man, I do the exact same thing to our Heavenly Father. So it changes my approaches, and it makes me as a father be intentional on the way that I approach them, the way that I respond to something that they've misbehaved in, that they have no idea that they did something wrong.
Sure.
So it's really made me approach them in a way that, our Heavenly Father would approach me.
Yeah.
So in a loving way. So that's one step, and understanding too that, between my earthly father and my Heavenly Father, there's my earthly father's not perfect, but my Heavenly Father is. So anything that I can do on this side of heaven that's close to perfection and me pursuing excellence as a father, I want to make sure I give my kids that.
Yeah.
So do I get it right every day? No, I don't get it right every day. But that it really has changed my way of on my approach.
Yeah.
One of the things that has come up here recently for us, I know with everything that's going on with COVID, and then with the racial tensions that are happening, excuse me, in our world today, we also just lost our grandparent.
Yeah.
And my kids were very present in that moment. And for me as a dad, it was like I knew what was going on, and I knew the severity of what was happening. There was an ambulance, there's a police car, there's a sheriff, and we're moving in and out of the house, and they're sitting in a vehicle and they're kind of watching. And in that moment, I couldn't say exactly what was happening, but for those in the car that understood or couldn't understand what was going on, it was one of those things. Hey, everything's not okay at this moment.
Yeah.
But it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because we have a Heavenly Father that, we do the practical, and then he does the supernatural. So it's me, again, explaining to them and showing them, even in my actions, did I want to panic? Yeah, I wanted to panic.
Yeah.
I was kind of frantic too, but seeing their faces and seeing them and knowing where they're at,
yeah,
I had to meet them where they were at. So it was me saying, hey, everything's not okay, but it's going to be all right. And we're going to get through this together as a family, and God has us. And then we prayed. And we prayed for, our grandmother and what she was going through at the time. And we prayed for, our grandparents, our other grandparents, and us as siblings and mothers and fathers. So we just kind of went through the whole thing. Anytime that you get to pray with your kids, and you'll get to know this too, Miss Kim, that you always start with mom and dad and maybe a toy, and then it's the dog. But we went through the whole line, and we began to pray for each other and just kind of pray about those things. And after her passing, the conversation from our 9-year-old all the way down to our 4-year-old, it was one of, hey, this is what's happened, and this is where she is.
Yeah.
She's with Jesus. She gets to be with Jesus. And having that conversation with them, it's, again, their understanding of who Jesus is and who God is. And from there, it was another conversation that had to be had a few days later, because, we will bring it back up, and it's one of those things like, hey, well, grandma's, I was like, well, grandma's with Jesus. And it's not coming from me as like, hey, I'm frustrated, I just told you that. But it was like, hey, this is where she is, and this is how we get there. So it just, each day I'm counting at their mercy on what I can give them, because they're learning every day. Yeah. So whatever they bring to me.
I love what you just said right there. I want to camp on that for just a sec. That just because they're saying it again doesn't mean they're not listening. That's how kids a lot of times process is it doesn't take them one moment to get it. It's they're having to verbally and sometimes like they're just talking out loud. They're thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Like my 2-year-old Arya, she will say she'll say what she's feeling to you until I turn and look at her and say it back to her. You're feeling happy. You're so happy. Or I'm so sad. Like it's them processing through and seeing if they're heard a lot of times. So I love that, Jure, of like you're like just coming back and with patience saying again, nope, grandma's gone, grandma's died. She's in heaven with Jesus. The reason I turned around, sorry that was distracting, but I have I love the books on my shelves. This book right here, Theology is a great book, but I have a book up here, Talk Now and Later, by Brian Dollar. He's a kids pastor over in Arkansas. He's a phenomenal kids pastor. This book is great. I'll come back to that. But Kim, I've been ready and waiting. So just practical stuff, like practical things parents can do. Maybe give one for preschoolers, because you got 2 and under that there's some there. So maybe just kind of hit each major age, that kind of 2 and under, our preschoolers, our early elementary and late elementary. Just give us a couple of practical things for having these conversations.
And I think kind of across the board, some good guidelines to keep in place is to share honestly to their developmental level, of course, but be honest and don't make promises or say things that you can't control. Like I know my sister's having to have the conversations with her child of, yes, this virus is scary and people are getting sick and even dying, but mom and daddy will do everything that we can to get home safely to you. She can't promise we're all going to be fine. None of us are going to get sick, but we're going to do everything in our power to get back home to you. And Dre, what you were saying, that God's got this, even if we don't, God's got it. So being able to be honest to the level that you can and not promising things you can't, because that helps kids latch onto what you say, and being able to trust what you're saying is so important, because parents are their people. And like you guys have been saying, that's also how we see God mirrored here, and learning that we can trust parents helps us also learn that we can trust God. Some other things, and it's interesting hearing you guys, because you're hitting on some of the points I was hoping to bring up. With kids with big emotions, a lot of times there's this repetitiveness that, and if you think about us as adults, as I don't feel worried about it today, and then, okay, well, it's going to be okay, and here's why, and then never feel worried again. I probably feel worried again an hour later or the next day. And so even for me as an adult, I'm having to retell myself things in my head to help me manage my emotions. We can't expect our kids to be any different. And in fact, a lot of times for them, the process of carrying these big emotions is made easier by telling the story again. So being able to, okay, this thing happened and it was really scary, and being able to talk through the story. So Jure, just to use your example with your kids, especially the younger ones who are trying to figure it out, that experience of waiting in the car while everything was going on, it may be a story that they have to tell again and walk all the way through, that we were there and the ambulance came and there were helpers there who helped us, and we were worried and we were scared, but we had God and we had helpers. And then this happened and grandmother died, and now she's in heaven with Jesus, and we can feel sad, but we can also be excited because we know that we can go to heaven too. And they may have to tell that story.
Good. Oh, it's so good.
But walking through that helps them to feel those emotions, to know, like, hey, all these things are okay to feel. And they get the truth of this story, and it gives them something concrete to hold on to hold those emotions, this name it to tame it sort of thing. Another practical thing, and this, I know you said like target it to age groups, but so many things are applicable all the way from very small
Totally.
to
Keep
adults.
going. This is
Um,
gold. This is so good.
So sometimes emotions get so big that you can't, their kids aren't in a place where they can talk about it. Parents aren't in a place where they can talk. And it's this, when your brain gets so overwhelmed by emotion that it's hard to think logically. It's hard to even communicate logically about it. That's not the time to have a hard conversation. When your child's in the middle of meltdown or in the middle of like overwhelm, tears, or yelling or whatever, that most parents recognize that's not the time to have a deep conversation. And so what do you do in those moments so that you can get to the hard conversation, you can get to the heart of the emotion that's leading to that? A lot of times it's just moving. Like, man, I can see that we're not at a point where we can talk. Let's do some jumping jacks. Let's hold hands and run around the house. Just moving. Move it or lose it is this thing. And it seems so silly, like, hey, I know we need to have a conversation or discipline needs to happen, but we can't get to that point until both of our brains are calmed down a little bit.
Yeah.
And just moving helps your brain to come back online, to be able to have those hard conversations again.
That's
so
great.
being able to see, like, here's the time to have the conversation, dinner time, when things are quieter, when people are calmer. And this is where we can get more deeply into some of the details or what's going on. And here's a time where we need to just acknowledge this is a big feeling that is hard, that is overwhelming. And let's just feel that feeling, or let's move so we can handle this feeling better. Let's have a way to get this feeling out. Like, man, you're really frustrated and angry and disappointed that you didn't get to be a part of this thing, that, your sports isn't happening, or school didn't happen, or your birthday didn't look how you wanted. Let's go kick a ball as hard as we can against the wall for a little while, and then we'll talk about it. So being able to give outlets for these big feelings, for your kids and for you, because parents aren't immune to big feelings, and our brains get overwhelmed too. And there are times when I know I'm not in a place to have a hard conversation, when my feelings are overwhelming, that I need to take a step back, do some of the things Melissa talked about, to help my own feelings come under control so that I can be there with my children and their feelings. And that leads to, I think, my last point of, because we as adults are humans that are also experiencing all of these pressures, we don't always get it right. And there are times that we mess up. There are times we're going to respond to our children in ways that we wish we didn't, in ways that don't align with how we want to be as believers, or as parents. And that can feel like a sticking point, or a hopeless point, or like, I've ruined everything, and how do I get back from this? And I think that in those moments where we mess up, is such a great opportunity to model how we can come to God again when we mess up. That repairing a relationship is so important. And a phrase that I like to give to myself, and I give to a lot of people that I'm working with, and parents especially, is what's most important isn't always what you did in the moment. It's what you do after what you have done.
Wow.
So in the moment, yelling at your child may feel like the biggest thing. And that is important. But what's most important is, what do you do now? How do you repair that relationship? How do you come back to them and acknowledge, I didn't behave in a way that I want to behave, and it was hurtful for you. And I need to ask your forgiveness. And here's how we can move forward from this well. It doesn't necessarily mean whatever the situation that led to yelling is okay. You're not necessarily okaying their behavior or okaying any of that, but being able to also acknowledge, I did something wrong, and here's how I move forward from that. That can be such a teachable moment. And I know that's not necessarily the tough conversation we were talking about having, but it's a tough conversation that has to happen with kids to model.
Have you been spying in my house? Like that, I can't tell you. My number two, my first daughter, she is a firecracker.
Yep.
And she's the one that I have sometimes that those moments where I'm like, ah! But
Yeah.
then she's probably the one that I've had to go back to the most and say, Ellie, I'm sorry. Daddy should not have, that was not appropriate for me. Will you forgive me? We have 3 values in our house that we put on a sign. Words matter, moments matter, and forgiveness matters. And we just took a look at it and said, that's kind of a framework for our family. We said, those are some of our values, that our words really matter, that those moments matter with our family, and that we want to be quick to seek, ask, and grant forgiveness in our family. So that's just like, Kim, that is so good. I love hearing from you. Man, so I love this. This has been such a great conversation. We're going to kind of wrap it up and close it up, but just to give parents a framework for talk with your kids in age-appropriate ways. Take care of yourself first. Like, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a really good thing. Take care of yourself first. Know that your own emotions can run high, and so finding time to process through those emotions, and then just some practical things of move with your kids. Make sure you're taking moments with your kids. Let your kids teach you about what it's like, how God sees us, and how we interact, and let God inform our parenting. Man, this has been so good. Thank you so much to every one of you guys for jumping on here. KidPoint kids and parents, we absolutely love you. We're going to be having more conversations as we have the ability to film them, and to have these conversations on how to walk through tricky stuff. Not tricky stuff, really hard stuff in our world. And we hope you'll join us for those conversations. Thanks for watching this one. We love you guys. Peace and grace.